Isn't it a resource extensive building everything in the house?
You can actually design the best possible solution. You're not at the whim of the APIs of your providers. Relatively expensive system, which actually also had a lot of errors, like a lot of high probability of the money going missing. All of this can be automated, and all of it can actually be made more effective and more powerful than it is today. We are going to see more and more agents executing transactions in the background for customers. These scammers are not regionally isolated. These people are actually operating all around the world. Our product managers need to hustle.
Alright guys, look, most fintechs focus on sleek UI and outsource the hard stuff to banks usually. My guest today thinks that's a recipe for disaster. Shannon Scott is the Chief Product Officer at Airwallex, an $8 billion giant that actually owns its infrastructure. He was a Palantir's 100th hire and now leads team building what they call at Airwallex Born Global Finance Team. Shannon, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Sam. It's great to be here.
Shannon, before we dive deeper into your products, could you please briefly explain me what's product building philosophy at Airwallex? How do you guys decide what products to build and how to build them actually?
Yeah, great question. I think we started with a global infrastructure for businesses to be able to sort of collect and move money internationally. And as we look forward to what businesses are trying to do financially, it's like, what are all aspects of the financial stack that we can help with? And this is not just about financial infrastructure. It could be card issuing or payments collections, but also spend management services or billing services. And as we look at features like AI, it's like, how are we helping financial operations teams do more with fewer resources and automate manual processes? So the first thing is, what can we help our businesses do to manage their business? How can we make them operate as efficiently as possible? And then we look for, what works well and collaborates with the stack we already have, and how can we continue to expand to provide a really coherent service to those businesses.
Right. And you were an engineer in the past, then turned a CPO. And how do you usually look at product roadmap differently than pure business executive? What's your approach?
I think my background is software engineering, but I spent a lot of time, when you look at companies like Palantir and their enterprise software, you have to go really deep with that customer to understand what are they trying to get out of a data analytics platform? Like, what are their problems? And even if we have a great technology stack, we're not going to be able to make that product useful for the customer unless we can really understand the problems they're trying to build. So while I have the engineering background, a lot of time was spent just working with the customers to understand, how can we help you? How can we deploy this software successfully into your business? How can we train your staff to make sure they're getting the most out of it? How can we even work with you to sort of identify the problems that you need solving? And I think that hybrid of software engineering and sort of empathy with the customer, is the intersection of that is really the role of the product manager. So I think that background for me has been really suitable for moving into this role at Airwallex.
Right. And as you mentioned, you worked at Palantir and you worked there at almost 11 years. And why was Airwallex the only company that you decided to choose to move away from Palantir and join this company?
Yeah, look, actually, so based in Australia, I think I've had the opportunity to work internationally quite a lot throughout my career. But the opportunity to join Palantir as a Silicon Valley company back in 2008 was a really exciting opportunity for me. I knew they were working on really challenging and interesting problems. And when I met Jack Sang at Airwallex, I realized that he also had really significant ambition around how you can sort of reorient the financial infrastructure available today, which is typically supported by traditional banks that have been around for a century. And how can you really sort of approach that problem differently? When you think more deeply about this, as the sort of string unravels, you can see there's just so much to build, so much opportunity. Bringing together all of these different financial services in a global approach means that Airwallex was onto something that I think was pretty special. A lot of work, or a lot still ahead of us, but a really exciting opportunity to actually have a really big impact in this space. And I think, personally, if I'm talking to people thinking about their careers, not just people looking at our product, but
Yeah.
what is the company that you can actually sort of ride a wave with? That means you can grow really quickly in your own learnings, the same way that company is growing quickly. So the more ambitious, the faster they're growing. I think that's all the more exciting.
Right. And Shannon, I know that Airwallex is proud because you guys built your infrastructure in-house, and also you guys are proud because of the number of licenses you guys hold. So why did you guys chose to go the hard way to obtain 80 plus global licenses instead of just working with the partners? As we know, there are banks, there are banking as a service providers, there are other partners in every and each market that could help you to go to the market very quickly.
Yeah, look, I think while it's true that you could build a layer, perhaps a thin layer across those different services, and that would sort of help businesses, I think, get started. Really, when we scroll forward, we want to make sure that we can create the highest quality of service for the lowest cost, and do it in a way that maximizes sort of compliance and recognitions of the requirements of that, perhaps the regulatory system in that individual region. And so, by going right to the bottom, by actually really being the party responsible for that infrastructure, it means you can actually design the best possible solution. You're not at the whim
Mm-hmm.
of the APIs of your providers. The most cost-effective solution, because you are not there's not sort of multiple parties in the middle that are sort of taking a cut of the services you're trying to provide. And by sort of deeply understanding and being responsive for this system, you're really making sure you are doing it in a way that is compliant and meets various regulations, addresses various sort of challenges that might come up with fraud or sort of really specific nuances about a given region. So we wanted to build the best possible solution. We know it is a long journey to bring together all of these different financial services from around the world,
Yeah.
but we're making great progress on this. And I think as we continue to scale, customers are going to recognize that we can provide really the highest quality of service, and do it in a way that is sort of as broad as possible for the services they need.
Right. Continuing the topic of the licensing, I know that you guys secured a new license in Malaysia. So do you think Southeast Asian market is easier than European and the US market because you guys started in Australia, which is closer to Asia, then you expanded into Europe and the UK. Do you think those markets are easier than the UK and Europe?
Not necessarily, actually. We have a lot of debate internally about which services that we should offer to which regions next. We've gone to a lot of effort to build out this infrastructure. We've connected, starting in Australia and working in Asia. We've connected our customers in those regions with the rest of the world. It
Right.
makes sense to offer more and more countries access to those services, and so we will look to bring on as many regions as possible in the near future, such as Malaysia or Brazil or Japan, for example.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of different questions that go into that. You have to look at the nature of the market. Now, a lot of these countries in Southeast Asia are very comfortable working internationally, and they're working with a lot of different
Yeah.
trade partners in those regions. I think Europe is a collection of countries that are also working with many different trade partners and different currencies.
True.
Interestingly, in the United States, it's typically more domestic. There's a lot of businesses. It's a large collection of many states all working in USD, but more and more you're seeing US businesses, as global native businesses with AI companies and other sort of online businesses that are reaching the world as well. And so I think all regions benefit from our technology. We have to look at things like what is the regulatory requirements in those regions. How do you actually acquire the license? In what ways do you need to customize our existing software or expand its services to enable the requirements of that region?
Right.
And so we look at all these different aspects, and frankly, we're trying to move as quickly as we can to unlock those opportunities for as many customers around the world.
Right. And guys, you recently committed $1.1 billion to the European, UK, and basically EMEA market. And this question is to you, Shannon. How do you manage product culture when your engineering team basically scattered all around the world, like Australia, UK, the US? How do you manage the culture?
Yeah, it's actually a really interesting, I think, circumstance of Airwallex as a business. I think you get a lot of companies that might be sort of headquartered in London or headquartered in California, and then they have sort of satellite offices around the world. Airwallex is truly a global native company, I think, founded here in Melbourne. We have a lot of staff in Singapore, folks in Amsterdam, in London, in the United States, and a variety of other regions. So we are uh, genuinely globally distributed, and we benefit a lot from the technologies that have made it very easy for us to connect, such as those that we used over COVID and Zoom, for example. But it is interesting that you have different cultures around the world. It is interesting that, for example, in the US, I think the product management discipline is very strong because you have
Okay.
a really high quality of consumer services. Like companies like Microsoft or Google or Meta, for example, have built, or Apple have built, these incredibly high quality products and have sort of taught the well, not just Americans, but I think people in all regions,
Yeah.
just what good quality software looks like. And so I think the product discipline is very strong in the United States. However, I think in other regions like for example, our engineering team in Australia, I think most businesses or most tech startups are thinking about how to operate globally from day one because it's a relatively smaller country. Your market is not as large here, and so you want to sort of reach more customers, more consumers of your product internationally. And so they have a
Yeah.
really great global mindset in the way they think about product building and supporting different regions or cultures. So the benefit for Airwallex is that by having staff across different regions, yes, there's some challenges with time zone, but you can really sort of leverage all of the insights of folks in these different regions to create a best-in-class product that does sort of take into account the nuances of different regions and the different ways of thinking about how to build product and technology.
Right. And I also went through some of the articles that was written by Jack, your CEO, and in one of his latest articles, he said that you cannot basically wipe code the infrastructure, especially for fintechs and payment companies, and that could be the biggest risk for the companies. So, what's the biggest risk for fintechs that actually are trying to wipe code their backend? When I say wipe code, I mean maybe in this context is going and partnering with banking as a service providers, because as you said, maybe it's not the best strategy to scale globally, right?
Yeah, look, there's so many different ways to unpack this discussion. I want to come back to sort of AI and vibe coding in a minute and how sort of we use it for our customers. But if you start with that infrastructure and the
Yeah,
licenses, like what's very clear is that you need to like very deeply understand the responsibilities of the financial services that you're offering in a given region,
yeah,
how people are going to utilize it, how you actually need to understand who that customer is and what they're doing, and various transaction monitoring and other compliance requirements. That's going to be very difficult to do if you don't deeply understand the stack in the first place. And so vibe coding might be okay as long as you have like really significant depth in terms of like your engineers understanding what to build and what the constraints are in actually building it, and are you providing the right sort of prompting to get a software engineer or an agent to build that for you. Now,
yeah.
an interesting thing about the way Airwallex approaches our financial infrastructure, because we haven't even really talked about the customer base yet, but we have both our sort of direct business customers, but we also have platform customers, and they actually use our infrastructure under the hood to build their own services on top of our infrastructure.
Okay.
And so, for example, if you're a sort of a HR management company and you wanted to provide payroll services to the businesses paying their employees, you might use Airwallex's sort of payout rails under the hood to pay in different currencies and countries around the world. Now, we don't actually really want that HR company to have to worry about all of the legal requirements of that region, like the transaction monitoring, know your customer. If there's various sort of requirements around just authentication controls. So, for example, in the UK, they have PSD2, and it's very important that you make sure you correctly authenticate the transactions that you're executing.
Right.
We want to actually build all of that tech within our stack. And that means that the customers or the platforms building on top of our infrastructure don't have to worry about building that themselves. They should certainly understand it, but we're going to handle all the onboarding, all the transaction monitoring, all of the authentication requirements. And so if we can actually build this stack and be accountable for all of the different services that we're offering, that gives more license and perhaps like less sort of concern for those platforms around, what do they need to be building? What do they need to be looking out for? Now, if I can build a really good tech stack, then I
Okay.
could have agents in theory doing whatever they want with my product because I've put the
Right.
right rails in place so that they can build great technology. I don't mind if they vibe code it. Look, it's their business to be successful, but it means they're going to use our technology appropriately because of the rails that we've put into our product.
Shannon, isn't it a resource extensive building everything in the house, and especially when you work across different regions? Because again, if I go deeper into one aspect of your business, which is compliance and KYC, KYB, each country has their own requirements, right? Don't you think it's a resource extensive? You are spending too much money by building in-house everything?
Yeah, there are a lot of different requirements, but there's obviously a lot of similarities between these different banking providers and services. Obviously, you see a homogeneity in the way that different countries are coming together. Like, we have different currencies. We have euros and USD and AUD, for example, but we can do business internationally. We can actually sort of move money between each other. We can do the appropriate transaction monitoring between different countries. And so there is a level of similarity between how these services are actually working. If I think about know your customer, you do need to understand who they are and use an appropriate sort of identification product. A passport is a ubiquitous product around the world that's relatively easy to understand. Some countries
Mm-hmm.
might have a better authentication technology that we can leverage, but it's really just the sort of the last 10% or the last 20% of the service that we offer. In many ways, it's also an advantage because we, like all financial institutions, will have nefarious actors who want to try and log into our system or sign up to our products, and they might be trying to
Yeah.
use a fake ID, or they might be trying to sign up in order to scam innocent individuals in that region or another region by tricking them into sending them money, for example.
Yeah.
These scammers are not regionally isolated. These people
Right.
are actually operating all around the world. And if they can trick an Australian to accidentally wire them money, then they can also trick an American or a British individual.
Makes
And in
sense.
many ways, by us actually sort of bringing together all of these different financial services, we see the different behaviors of how both legitimate users and
Mm.
potentially nefarious users are actually attempting to use our product. We see the types of threats and risks that happens in those regions, and we can actually take best of breed approaches to build a product that I think is going to be net better for all
Right.
regions because we've taken what is best in class in one country and also met the requirements of another country, and ultimately, we're going to recycle the features or the aspects that are beneficial to other regions.
I see.
So, while it's a lot of work, we have built a really modular product, and I think we're seeing a lot of benefits of it all coming together.
Right, makes sense. No, thank you for explaining this. And on in his article, Jack also mentioned something called multi-currency core. So why do you think it's different than traditional banking batch processing systems or traditional core banking systems? Because you guys from very beginning focused on multi-currency, right? Building everything around international transfers. So if you could just explain in a few words.
I think actually it sounds very obvious that you should be, as an international company or product that you want to be multi-currency. But if you look back, traditionally, that's not how banking systems, came to be, right? They were actually inherently sort of domestic providers. They were sort of managing a local currency, and therefore they were, what was very ingrained into their process that there is just one currency. It was USD, and that's the only one you need to worry about. That all of your customers are going to want to operate in USD, and you don't really need to think about any other currencies. Now,
Yeah.
eventually, for customers who then said, "Well, actually, I need to move some money to a supplier, and I need to pay them in euros," they come up with a network or a process that allowed. With a market and with another sort of bank in another country, an ability to move money between those institutions. But it was a very slow, relatively expensive system, which actually also had a lot of errors, like a lot of high probability of the money going missing or sort of an error in the wire instructions. And so you could tell it just wasn't built in a way that was sort of first and foremost taking into account that you're going to want to move money internationally. Now, Airwallex
Right.
is 10 years old, and going back to that sort of first year, the very first recognition was we want to make it easy to move money internationally. And so
Right.
with that core, we wanted to make any currency ubiquitously available in Airwallex, make all of the rails in which you might want to move that currency available to our customers,
Hmm.
and make it happen cheaply and quickly.
Right.
And all of the other financial services you can provide sort of sit upon that assumption that you are currency agnostic.
Got it. Got it. And Shannon, here's a challenge for you. I know that Jack set a target of 10 billion revenue by 2030. So you guys are at 1.1 billion revenue currently. What do you think? What products you need to build to basically close that $9 billion gap?
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a significant gap, but when you look at the growth rates over the past 5 years, I think it's highly realistic that we can actually keep compounding to reach that number. What we're seeing is making the product available to more and more customers around the world, and we talked about this by unlocking additional licenses and being able to provide our services in more countries. So I think the first
Okay.
is actually making our product more accessible to more customers. We're actually seeing customers, move more and more funds through the platform and more global trade, which is driving that growth. But as we came back to earlier, or you asked me the product question about how do I think about building, we haven't stopped at just offering that financial infrastructure. It's not just about doing the FX conversion or moving the funds. It's actually about how am I managing or helping you to manage your business as effectively as possible. So the
Okay.
additional modules and sort of software services that we're providing on top of the infrastructure are also creating new revenue channels for Airwallex. And I think it's fantastic to see when our customers, they might start by using the sort of money movement product, but then they actually start using our Airwallex spend product to manage how all of their vendors are being paid, manage all the bills, the approvals of their employee expenses. We have the payments product, which has been around for several years to help customers collect funds online. But very recently, we saw many customers also needing to deal with not only selling services online, but actually also continuing to sell or introducing new physical stores and needed
Right.
to receive money physically. So one of the new products that we've launched recently is Airwallex terminals, which means that customers don't actually have to have a completely separate provider for the payment solutions they have in store. And this is incredibly
Okay.
powerful because now if you are actually a multinational business and you do have both an online presence and a physical presence around the world, you actually can deploy one tech stack. You can use Airwallex to receive all of the funds through your online checkout. You can use Airwallex as your sort of brick and mortar store terminals in the US, and you can use it as your brick and mortar stores in Hong Kong or in Australia, for example. So as we keep adding more and more of these services and really expanding the suite of products that customers need, it means we can have a better relationship with our customers, and ultimately I think that will drive our growth.
So you guys are going to hardware as well. I see. Almost everyone seems to be jumping in that wagon. So why now? Why did you guys decide to launch hardware solutions now?
I think there's a lot of things that I would love to have built yesterday. It's also a matter of time to getting around to them, but it's really great we've been able to prioritize this feature and actually
Right.
launch it. We were seeing a lot of customers coming to us and actually sort of recognizing the gap there, that they had to have completely different solutions, both. Well, actually, if we take a step back, a lot of our customers, they may have needed to sort of receive funds from customers around the world in all different countries. So US customers paid in USD, Australian customers paid in AUD, UK in pounds, for example. And that meant
Yeah.
historically they needed to work with three different banks. Someone in the US, a banking provider in Australia, and one in the UK, for example. That's three different systems that your financial operations team had to
Okay.
manage to actually support those collections. And our customers recognize that they can use Airwallex, and now they have one system to solve for all three regions. I think it's the exact same point as we look to physical terminals. It's like I needed an online presence. I've consolidated that down from 3 to 1. Now I have
Yeah.
physical stores in 3 different countries. I've got 3 different physical terminal providers. It also means that I can't have a clean understanding of my business health
Right.
because I've got sort of revenue coming in and from the physical terminals and the providers of those systems. I've got revenue coming in from my online providers, and so you've got money moving everywhere. You've got different stacks and not really one cohesive picture. And so we saw customers who are asking for this product and the need to sort of bring it all together. And so it's been exciting to be able to release that this year.
I see. I see. Shannon, I want to challenge you a bit. Sorry for that. Here's an interesting question. You guys are building basically infrastructure for payments world, right? One of your customers, I know that is Brex, expense management platform, right, in the US. But you guys, on the other hand, also provide similar services. You provide expense management. You just mentioned that. Don't you think your customers are threatened by these products that you are launching that basically directly compete with what they are doing actually?
I think actually it would be a shame if Airwallex was to say, yes, we have this fantastic infrastructure and we're not going to allow anybody else to access it. We also have an expense management solution, and yes, it is similar to Brex. Now, if customers said, hey, I like Brex because it has a particular feature that Airwallex doesn't have, but I really need Airwallex's sort of multi-currency solution, it'd be pretty disappointing if we're sort of like bad luck. There's no, you can only use Airwallex. We're the only one who provides this sort of integrated stack. That might be a little bit of a silly example, but I'm very interested to understand what companies will build with financial infrastructure over the next decade. Just because I have a lot of plans and exciting things to build, and one of them is an expense management solution, and I've got other products such as Airwallex billing, I know I'm not going to be able to provide all of the different services that other platforms can come up with by having access to this financial infrastructure. I think it's not dissimilar to Amazon saying that they recognize the need to build sort of good, well, physical hardware management services, and they were able to sort of create cloud services in supporting their own online shopping and the other products they build. They recognized the value of that infrastructure, and they made it available to other companies, which really sort of elevated the the ability for other tech companies to build great products into the future. I want to see companies build great products on top of our infrastructure as well, and I want to make financial infrastructure accessible. It's easy. Well,
Right.
today it's easy for cloud services to provide, data, compute, and storage infrastructure. Financial infrastructure is very difficult because of some of the challenges we talked about earlier with the licenses
Yeah.
required, the regulatory aspects, the transaction monitoring. We are handling those parts of the financial infrastructure problem, and I want companies to be able to leverage this and build great solutions on top of it. So if you're a
Makes
HR
sense.
company, for example, that we've talked about earlier, if you are a marketplace, for example, I want you to be able to access this infrastructure and build great products. I hope that Rex will continue to do the same.
I hope so, Shannon. And we briefly touched the topic of AI. And when we talk about expense management, I believe AI is one of the solutions that could be deployed quickly in expense management because there are different moving parts. So I just wanted to get your opinion. What do you think? Agentic AI, how would that change CFO stack, expense management, in the next 3 years? For example, by 2029, well, what some of the new tools CFOs will have in their stack, basically?
Yeah, I think today CFOs are just trying to get a lot done with very few resources, and there are so many steps to perhaps a single financial transaction. So you might need to onboard a vendor. You might need to actually verify that this vendor is an appropriate and safe vendor for the services that you actually need. You need to make sure that the purchase order you issue to that vendor
Yeah,
has the correct set of products, and the invoice that they issue sort of matches that purchase order, that the work order comes through. You want somebody to approve this has actually happened. You want to schedule the transfers to that vendor on the appropriate agreed schedule. You want to see that those actually payments have been received and reconciled. You want to then reconcile that with your accounting system. Many of these steps are incredibly manual. Sometimes they're
okay,
in completely different systems. Maybe the payment happens in a different place to where the actual sort of vendor onboarding took place. And that means you're going to have a huge amount of manual work to do. And if they're different systems, you might have errors that take place. You might actually have like sort of incorrect typing from one system into the next. All of this can be automated, and all of it can actually be made more effective and more powerful than it is today. And so just even understanding, who, and this goes a few steps away from the financial aspect, but just understanding, like, is what this vendor offering me an appropriate price relative to
mm,
what other customers of that vendor have been charged and what competitors to that vendor are charging. Now, you hope that someone in your team did the due diligence to answer that question, but they're very busy too. And if you have an agent that's actually sort of running off and figuring this out for you, presenting this information back to you, and then bringing this back to the financial question, it's like, am I paying the right vendor the right amount? The agent can say, yes, we've verified this account number, we've verified that this vendor is who they say they are. We've got a lot of data that suggests there's nothing, nefarious happening here. All of these things you often didn't have time to do before. So you're going to get not only sort of automation, which reduces manual effort, but you're going to get these superpowers that you didn't have before, where you can very quickly get this information about a vendor. You can very quickly get information about maybe cash flow for the vendor spend over the coming 12 months that you simply
right.
didn't access. And so this is, I think, really exciting for financial teams to do far more than they're doing today.
Shannon, but with AI, it's not as easy as it seems to be. How do you prevent agents from making multi-billion-dollar hallucinations, huh? Because we know this problem exists in the market.
Except none of the examples I just gave, included actually triggering the financial transaction.
Okay, I
And
see.
I think this is like, and I think the point I'm trying to make is that the financial transaction is just, one of many steps that a financial team has to actually do. And if I look at what a financial operations team is doing, okay, so there's $10,000 being paid to this vendor, and that's an important check to be written, so to speak. It's actually a transfer to be made. Very often, what will happen is one person might enter the recipient details, the account number. One person will verify those account numbers, and they will actually enter the transaction amount, and they will post the transaction for approval. And then a third person might actually review this transaction and then actually authorize, and that transaction will then be executed.
Okay.
So you've got three different people in the loop to actually make sure that the right amount of funds went to the right party. Now, what if I just took two of those out of the picture for you? So I had the agent verify and prove that they had actually been able to check the vendor. When I say prove, there might be a few different ways to do it. So you can get the agent to actually show you where they source this information from, or create some credibility in what the agent is suggesting rather than just blindly trusting it. Then it can set up the transfer for you, which is typically just a manual process anyway. So that can be done by an agent. But then the final execution can still be done by a human pair of eyes.
Right.
And so sort of using AI to augment the financial operations team is a huge power for them to be able to operate efficiently.
One of my last questions, do you think we will be able to remove the third part as well in the future with AI? Do you think
Yeah,
we'll
so
come to that point at one time?
yeah, I do, but I think what we're also seeing, and you talked about Brex being a customer of Airwallex, and
Yes.
so what's happening here? It's like you've got an expense management solution that probably 5 years ago used to be a product that would manage and reconcile your expenses for you, but it wouldn't actually do the financial transaction execution for you.
Right.
But now you've got a system where sort of our customer Brex is actually managing expenses and the financial execution for you, and so this means actually you've got software managing the reasons why money is being moved. It's not a completely isolated experience where there's one set of software here and then a banking provider there and someone's manually entering the data. More and more technology understands why they are executing the financial transaction, and then they are given authorization to actually execute the transaction. Now,
I see.
what I see happening over the coming years is we are going to see more and more agents executing transactions in the background for customers, but we're going to do this in a way that I think is a natural evolution of what's happening right now. It's software understanding why transactions need to be made, and then actually that being pushed down into a very tightly integrated sort of transaction execution. It's already happening, and I think agents and more and more
Okay.
sort of forward-thinking infrastructure, like blockchain, for example, and I think more and more better payment networks that are happening in different countries around the world that we're bringing together are going to make that quite a transparent process. And in doing so, it will be easier to deploy good technology on top of it.
Right. Shannon, before we go, this is my last question. For product managers who would love to join Airwallex, what one advice would you give them?
Great question. So I'm very excited that they already want to join us. That's wonderful. I mentioned earlier that I want product managers to join companies that I think are high growth companies. That is the greatest opportunity for those employees to learn and grow themselves. And so they're certainly going to get an opportunity like that at Airwallex. But look, we're looking for sort of very thoughtful and creative people who can solve these problems by really deeply understanding the subject matter.
Right.
And they recognize that we are a very ambitious company. We have these revenue goals, we have these customer growth goals, and a desire to really provide a breadth of great services to our customers. And so my product managers need to hustle. They need to really sort of get in and make things happen. Product managers are working with so many different parts of the business, obviously engineering and sales, but also your marketing teams, your legal teams, your operational teams, your customers. You have to be the one to bring it all together and actually make sure the right product gets into the hands of your customers. And so having that ambition to make it happen is a really important trait of our product managers.
Right. Shannon, it's been a great conversation. I learned a lot on how to build products at a global scale. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks very much, Sam. It was a lot of fun.